Your choice of heroes is the most important decision you'll ever make. Why? Because Napoleon spent his entire life trying to be Caesar. Caesar idolized Alexander the Great, and Alexander imagined himself as the next Achilles. This is the great man theory of history. It's a controversial idea proposed by historian Thomas Carlyle, who argued that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. Carlyle believed that history isn't shaped by the masses, but by the will of heroes, elite figures who should be followed and revered for their inherent genius. But this isn't simply a history lesson. If Carlyle is right, it means your choice of who to follow is the single most important factor in who you will become. So let's uncover the secrets of the great man theory, how you can use it to unlock your full potential, and also why you've probably never been taught it in your school's history class. So first, who is the man behind this galvanizing view of history? Thomas Carlyle was a 19th century Scottish essayist, historian, and philosopher who gave a series of lectures on heroism in 1840. These lectures were later published into a book called On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History. One of the book's main theses was the great man theory of history. Carlyle argued that heroes shape history through both their personal attributes and divine inspiration. The world essentially turns on the ideas and decisions of elite men. Carlyle writes, "Universal history, the history of what man has accomplished in this world, is at bottom the history of the great men who have worked here. They were the leaders of men, these great ones, the modelers, patterns, and in a wide sense, creators of whatsoever the general mass of men contrive to do or to attain. The soul of the whole world's history, it may justly be considered, or the history of these." But how do these great men emerge? Where do they come from? And what makes one great in the first place? Carlyle based his theory on a couple assumptions. The first assumption is that great leaders are born, not made. Carlyle emphasized nature over nurture. Heroes inherently possess the traits that enable them to rise to the occasion and lead on instinct. Therefore, those who rise to power usually deserve to lead because of their abilities. The second assumption is that great men rise only when a unique set of circumstances plays out. They don't emerge in a vacuum. Though every aspect of history isn't dependent on great men, heroes are the decisive factor in solving the problems of societies. They're the weight that tips the scale one way or another. Carlyle's heroes are utterly unique and possess a certain creative genius that can't be made up for with any amount of raw manpower. How many Roman legions are the equivalent to a Julius Caesar? How many minor poets will give us a Shakespeare? The hero is unquantifiable. Carlyle's hero is somewhat similar to Aristotle's conception of the magnanimous or great-souled man. The great-souled man is a man who possesses archetypal human virtue in the active sense, meaning he acts upon the world as opposed to having a more contemplative nature. The magnanimous man is a person of action. In Carlyle's conception, the hero isn't perfect, though. The world is filled with contradictions that the hero has to deal with. Thus, all heroes will be flawed. And it's precisely because they aren't perfect that they can serve as a pattern for others to imitate. This imitation is the force that moves history forward. For example, Alexander the Great and his phalanxes set the template for ancient warfare. It would be hundreds of years before his methods were defeated. Likewise, Napoleon used artillery in an overwhelming fashion, which no one had ever done before. Future generals took note and copied his tactics. But Carlyle's heroes aren't just military or political figures. He identified 6 types of hero, encompassing all facets of human life. There's the divine hero, like Odin, the prophet, like Muhammad, the poet, like Shakespeare, the priest, like Martin Luther, the man of letters, like Rousseau, and the king, like Napoleon. Thus, there is a hero for every interest one can have. And this is where it gets personal, because Carlyle believed that who our heroes are shapes us. Carlyle posited that the study of heroes was beneficial to one's character. By examining the lives of great men, we can develop courage, vision, and unique insights into our own nature. Studying heroes will make us a little more heroic. Now, Carlyle was far from the only historian to make this point. Long before him in the 2nd century, Plutarch wrote his seminal work, Parallel Lives, where he examined 23 great figures throughout history for exactly the same reasons. Plutarch dissected leaders like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Alcibiades, and Cicero, analyzing their lives in an attempt to answer what made these figures so influential. Thus, readers could copy their virtues and avoid their vices. His work is essentially a prototype of great man theory. And around the same time, Suetonius wrote the 12 Caesars, an examination of the first emperors of Rome. Suetonius and Plutarch, like Carlyle, understood history as the biographies of great men. Likewise, everyone's favorite political philosopher, Niccolo Machiavelli, showed that learning from the great men of history need not be a merely academic pursuit, but could have practical, real-world applications. He himself claimed that there was nothing more precious to him than the knowledge of the great men he gained by studying history. Machiavelli emphasized that rulers should read accounts of the great men so as to imitate their accomplishments and avoid their failures. He writes, "Another thing a ruler must do to exercise his mind is read history, in particular accounts of great leaders and their achievements. He should look at their wartime strategies and study the reasons for their victories and defeats so as to avoid their failures and imitate the successes. Above all, he must do what some great men have done in the past. Take as model a leader who's been much praised and admired, and keep his example and achievements in mind at all times." Machiavelli noted that most people act via imitation, but can never actually tread in another's path exactly. He thus advised to follow a trail blazed by someone who is truly great, someone worth imitating, so that if you don't reach the same level, at least you'll be a little higher than before. So many of the great men and women of history took this exact approach, and in turn they themselves became great. But it's likely you were never taught the great man approach to history when you were in school. Chances are you were taught a different lens of history, one that, instead of highlighting the great men and women who shaped our civilization, often downplays their accomplishments. Carlyle's view was top-down, but a competing theory, a history from below, is more popular with educators today. English philosopher Herbert Spencer was one of the first men to criticize Carlyle, believing that social conditions were more influential than individual heroes. Heroes were merely products of their social environment. Spencer writes, "Before the great man can remake his society must make him." Spencer's ideas went on to form the basis of what's now called social history, which focuses less on the elites of society and more on the common people. You might have read Howard Zinn's highly controversial, and I might argue problematic, A People's History of the United States, which is a prime example of this historical lens. These narratives often describe social movements as stemming from the ground up, while popular leaders are seen as reactionary to the pleas of the people. Leaders aren't inherently special, but rather stand-ins for any other figure that could have served as the figurehead of that movement. Moreover, in social history, the great men and women of history are often seen as oppressors rather than inspiring individuals. They got to the top not by being worthy of the role, but by being more cunning or ruthless than everyone else. In my opinion, it's a depressing view of history because it gives us no one to aspire to be. The great man theory gives us examples to strive for, but social history gives us the belief that great men and women need to be knocked off their pedestal. But this leads me to a caveat of great man theory. Though Carlyle often spoke of the great man in almost religious terms, calling him the light which has enlightened the darkness of the world. I suggest that we look toward the great men of history, not because they are all necessarily good men or worthy of emulation in every aspect, but because they have some quality that made them an impactful person that shaped our civilization. It is these impactful qualities that we should look for and emulate, not necessarily the ends that they were used for. A man can be a great orator and use it for a devious purpose. That does not mean we should strive to be devious. Rather, we should strive to become a great speaker and use it for good. Likewise, many political and logistical geniuses had questionable motives. We should learn from their tactics and emulate their technical skill sets, but use it to lift up others. And that is what the great men should be for us. They teach us something deep about human nature or mastery over a craft. They are not perfect, just as we will never be, but we receive something by learning from them. Carlyle says it best. We cannot look, however imperfectly, upon a great man without gaining something by him.